Yeah, it's shocking that lots of smart people like you still walk around thinking that multitasking is worth bragging about. But really, the research was very concretely done back around 2009. Um, Basically, to explain what's happening in our brains, when you look at the research, it might have multitasking in the title, but that's not what behavioral psychologists will talk about. It's actually called switch tasking. And your brain is very rapidly switching between your primary work and your secondary work. And it happens really fast, right? So, I mean, think about two really simple activities like walking and talking on your phone. There's almost zero interference as your brain switches from one activity to the next, but it's not doing them simultaneously. It's actually moving your focus back and forth. And so, if you've ever been to a conference, it may have been a while now that it's COVID, but if you see someone having an important phone call, a lot of times you'll see them literally turn to face like the corner, and sometimes they will bend down and like put a finger in their ear. And what they're doing is they're trying to block out all of the other interference so they can actually focus on something that is more important. If I was walking across a chasm on a rope bridge, I would hang up the phone, right? Because I would want all of my focus on stepping on each rung. So I think we take it for granted because a lot of things, listening to music while we run, it is very easy to go back and forth. But the reality is there's a cost. And I could go through, I think we listed 7 in the book, but I can just hit a couple really high ones here for you. The first one is time. And we actually got to talk to the researchers. So when you actually are bouncing between, there's 2 things that happen. The first thing is you switch your attention, and that is instantaneous. It's like squirrel, we are really good. We have evolved to notice things happening in the background. That's the instinct. So like if a saber-toothed tiger were crawling through the grass, we've evolved to notice that weird thing in the background. So that happens fast. But then your brain has to switch from the rules of what you're doing to the rules of what you're now focused on. So if you're writing an important email to a client, right, you're on paragraph 2, and then someone pops by or instant message you and says, hey, Alex, what do you want for lunch today? Well, thinking about whether you're going to eat healthy or get the nachos and chips is a different part of your brain. And there's a switching time. And we don't realize it, but like you're a reader. You ever had someone walk in when you were reading, you know they're talking to you, and you're like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? That's one of the few times. Most people, I get it when I'm reading. Other people get it when they're watching a movie or something, right? Someone comes in, they're intensely focused. They know that someone's talking to them, but they can't process it, and they have to ask them to go back. That happens all the time. And so research shows that the modern worker who bounces between their work and email and Twitter and phone calls, about 28% of their day is lost to the switching cost. So first and foremost, if I could give you back more than a quarter of your time, how would you invest it? Would you go home for that time and hang out with your friends and family? Would you put in some extra work and get ahead faster and retire earlier? Most people will never get to answer that question because they multitask all day long. Second big cost is it literally lowers your intelligence. So there was a group, I think it's College of New London. They did a meta study of different IQ tests, and they looked at 3 big sample sizes. One is people who just took a IQ test while they were focused. They had group B that had all taken an IQ test, but they had to get interrupted with phone calls and emails while they did it. And then they had a third sample, which is a large number of people who took an IQ test while stoned on marijuana. Right? I have to be careful who I teach this one to because high schoolers might take away the wrong lesson. But obviously, we know about it because, unsurprisingly, the people who were focused, right, not doing anything else and not on any drugs, scored on average 11 IQ points higher than the other people, which is a giant leap in terms of IQ. What's funny is that people who were stoned on average scored 6 points higher than the people who were multitasking. So it literally dumbs down your work. So it costs you time, it costs you quality, and I could go through a dozen other studies where people make more mistakes. I mean, there's a reason if you're a pilot or a surgeon or a bus driver, you're not allowed to multitask. As a surgeon, you can't even pick up your own tools. You just hold out your hand and say scalpel, right? Like they're very focused because lives are at stake. And so the question I would ask you and everyone else is, if you're really committed to multitasking, chances are you're not a surgeon. Chances are you're not a pilot, right? But whose life are you risking? Yours. I mean, what you're doing is you're taking your most important work, whatever that might be, and you're putting it at risk because you're not getting the full use of your time or your brain power to actually get the best results. And I don't know, like that number one activity, it might be like for me, writing, right? Or for a coder, coding, right? Or for a salesman, making sales calls, whatever that number one activity is. But then there's also, what about dinner with your family if you're not fully present? Like there's a relationship cost and there's a life cost. And so it's a big one. I usually do this, and I don't know what you're feeling right now, but a lot of times the audience, if I'm giving a speech, like starts to feel kind of beaten up. And what I'll do is I'll go, but engineers, right, at Apple and Google and Microsoft, I mean, they're paid bajillions of bucks to distract us all day long. And it's a reality, right? We are going to do some multitasking. So usually I'll say, knowing all of this, here's my challenge. You just brought up success list, so this works. When you do your success list for the week or the day, just don't multitask. Make a stand. Don't multitask when you're doing your number one activity. Allow yourself everywhere else, but when you're doing your number one, put your phone on do not disturb. And like, I don't know about you, but have you seen the new James Bond movie?
Yeah, I loved it.
Did you look at your phone throughout the whole thing?
Nope.
Like the theater I go to will kick you out if you open up your phone. And I'm happy not to have my phone out or my neighbor's phone out because I wanted to see Daniel Craig for the last time. So we know to do this sometimes, usually for our entertainment or like in a setting, like a wedding, right? We know it's just not right. Yet we violate it all the time in our personal life. So just identify, you know what, as a working dad, my number one time with my kids was reading time at bedtime. I had their full attention. And they were there, they were cuddled up, they were in that, post bath. It was like the perfect environment. They might have been grumpy in the morning going to school. That was my job too. But getting them at the end, like that is the last time I should be looking up my fantasy football scores, right? Be focused, be present during that number one, and no matter what area it's in. So if you can't tell, that one feels a little bit soapboxy because I was guilty of it. And then I've realized that a little bit of discipline, right? Just being focused for a few hours a day when you're doing that core activity, it gives you so much more freedom everywhere else. You can really kind of be undisciplined everywhere else.